Welcome, modern day mystics, fellow truth seekers, James and Justin, back again with another reaction. We're going to do something a little bit different here. We're going to take a look at what might be considered kind of a controversial video. It's called Understanding Islam, What Most People Misunderstand. And it's done by actualize.org. Leo Gura, it's his channel. Yeah, this is kind of like a different take on Islam, maybe for our audience and what you guys are used to. Now, I think it would be good to start here with a little bit of like a trigger warning. If you are a traditional Muslim, and you're comfy and cozy with what you believe, and you don't want to hear other ideas about your faith that conflict with your own, this video's not for you. Because it'll probably make you angry inside and want to send mean comments and stuff like that.
If you're unconscious and you don't even realize it, but you know that you are up for an argument, it's also for you. If you're whatever you want to be, it's for you. If you are conscious and you just want to enlighten us because you actually know more than us, feel free to say something.
So this is an alternate perspective. There's going to be some challenging things in here. But hey, we welcome all those who want to come in here with an open mind and take a look at this. You're welcome.
Wherever you come from.
Yeah.
Come as you are.
We should also note and say that we are going to do this in 3 parts.
This is part 1.
This is part 1. And if you like it, we'll continue with the series because this is a long video. It's like an hour and 10 minutes. So we'll cut it into 3 parts if you want us to keep doing it. So with that said, won't keep you waiting. Let's get into it.
It's quite unfortunate that there's lots of confusion today about Islam, what Islam fundamentally is about. People in the West don't understand this very well. And actually, a lot of Islamic people don't understand this very well either. It's kind of funny. There's lots of ideological positions and political debates which take place, which you see in the media, which you can see videos of on YouTube and so forth, and you can read about. And people write about Islam and the problems of radical Islam and all this sort of stuff. And what this turns into is a sort of like a mirror of the silly one-dimensional debate between science and religion. It's like you got science on one side, religion on the other side, and then you pick one side and then you fight with the other side. It's this sort of situation which is going on between the East and the Middle East. And it turns into this culture war. And this is very unfortunate because the core of what Islam is lost on 99.9% of people. It's heartbreaking for me to see this, which is why I wanted to shoot this episode, because we're just not taught about this. You're not taught about this in school if you grew up in the West. And this, of course, stems from a couple of factors. It stems from xenophobia. It stems from fear of foreigners. It stems from this sort of tribalist mentality that also goes on in the West, just as it does in the Middle East. But fundamentally, it stems from the problem of not really understanding religion, not understanding the roots of religion and mysticism. And it's actually very simple to understand. Islam literally in the Arabic language means submission. That's what Islam means. That tells you what it's about. But submission to what? Is it submission to the ideology of Islam? You might think that that's what that means. But no, that's not what it means. It means the total surrender of oneself to the truth or reality or God. The surrender of one's ego, of one's sense of identity to the larger thing that's going on here. This is God right here. This is reality right here. That's what you're submitting yourself to. Other synonyms for the translation of Islam from the Arabic into the English include words like obedience, peace, and purity. And those are all what come with submission of your ego to God. What we're talking about here is we're talking about self-transcendence, the same as is the goal and objective of Christianity and Judaism and Hinduism and yoga and Zen and every other tradition. It's no different. It's just framed in the style of the Middle East. It's framed from their cultural point of view, based on their values and their traditions and their history. The word Muslim, to be a Muslim, translates as one who submits to God. What many Westerners don't understand about Islam is that Islam is not some separate religion from Christianity or Judaism. Islam recognizes Christian and Jewish prophets like Jesus, Moses, Noah, David, Abraham, and others. It also recognizes the validity of Christian and Jewish sacred texts like the Bible and the Torah and others. So it doesn't reject these. Islam builds on top of them. Islam is really just like the third incarnation of Judeo-Christianity. So you had Judaism, which was like the earliest incarnation. Then with Jesus, you had the Christian incarnation, which is the second incarnation. It was sort of an innovation on Judaism. And then you had the third innovation, which came with Muhammad. And Muhammad's era was around 600 AD, so 600 years after Jesus. And so the additional extra little twist that Islam adds on top of the Judeo-Christian philosophy is that Muhammad was the final or the last prophet, which ends up being a big problem. Because, of course, like most religious traditions, they try to get a monopoly over the truth, which, of course, is completely antithetical to the truth. There's no such thing as the last prophet. There will never be a last prophet. You can become enlightened right now and you can be a prophet. There are millions of, well, not millions, but hundreds and maybe thousands even prophets that are alive right now who you can go speak to and visit. And they are as equally spiritually awakened as Muhammad was, at the very least. So by no means was Muhammad actually the last prophet, but in their tradition, that's how they frame it. And also, what Westerners don't understand is that Allah is just another name for the Christian God. It's not some other God that Muslims worship. It's the same Christian God, Allah, the one God. So there's a lot you can learn just by studying the history of Islam, sort of its origin story and the biography of Muhammad and just the historical developments of this tradition, which again is not taught very well in the West, which is why there's a lot of this sort of xenophobic reaction against it, because you're really not taught it unless you go out specifically and you educate yourself, or maybe you took some more advanced classes or some broad-ranging classes in university, like if you were studying comparative religion or something like that, then maybe you learned something about it. But generally, Westerners have a very poor understanding of this topic. I know I did, even though I got a pretty good education, just because this is not part of the core curriculum. What I want to talk about here is I want to talk about several aspects of Islam which can be illuminating for those of us who are into self-development and into self-actualization and spirituality. There's something to be gleaned from almost every mystical tradition and every religion if you know how to see the truth and ignore the corruption and the minutia. To be sure, there's plenty of corruption within Islam, just as there is with every single religious tradition, just as there is even with science, even in academia and everywhere else. Corruption is not a problem exclusive to Islam. Corruption is a problem that runs rampant throughout every facet of human life. So don't make the mistake of thinking that, oh, well, just because there's corruption here, that there's nothing valuable to be gleaned. No. Let's cover some of the different facets that are valuable for our purposes here. So perhaps the most important one of which is jihad. Jihad literally translates from the Arabic to the English as struggle. Jihad is struggle. Now, there's what's known as the lesser jihad and the greater jihad. But really, there's no distinction. There's only one jihad. So jihad means the struggle for what? Is it the struggle to kill your enemies? Is it the struggle to fight over oppression or evil? No. It's the struggle with yourself. It's the struggle with your own ego. It's the struggle with the evil inside of you. There is only one form of evil. There is only one devil, and he is you, the ego. That's it. That's the only struggle that exists in the world. All external struggles, the lesser jihad as it's known, so the distinction between the lesser and the greater is that the greater jihad is supposed to be the spiritual inner journey to self-realization. Okay, but then there's supposed to be like the lesser jihad, which is what the terrorists and the Muslim radicals are accused of doing. They're accused of engaging in the lesser jihad, which is fighting enemies abroad, fighting enemies who are the infidel, or fighting enemies who are the enemies of Islam, or who are the non-believers, the enemies of Allah. But there's no such thing, because the inner and the outer, the lesser and the greater, these are dualities. All these dualities will collapse and break down. And so really there's only one jihad. It's the struggle with the self. Any enemies that you have out there, infidels, whatever, they are you without you being conscious of it. So if you actually completed the greater jihad, you would become conscious that there is no difference between the greater and the lesser jihad, and that actually your fighting enemies out there somewhere is you really just fighting with yourself. You're always fighting with yourself. There is nothing but Allah. Allah is the only thing there is. Allah is fighting with itself. Allah can be ignorant, or Allah can be awake. When Allah is awake, he stops fighting with himself. When Allah is ignorant and stuck inside of Maya or illusion, then he thinks that there's separation and boundaries, and there's us versus them, and there's the believers and the disbelievers, and we got to punish the disbelievers and fight the disbelievers because they threaten the believers. The fully awakened Allah is not frightened by anything. His faith is unshakable because it's not faith anymore. It's being. It's direct consciousness. Allah is Allah. You can't shake Allah when you realize that you are Allah. So it's all about overcoming your own inner self-deceptions to ultimately transcend the ego and to realize the self, the true self, the infinite self, which is what Allah is. And this is self-actualization. Jihad is nothing other than what Actualize.org is about. Jihad is not some radical Islamic philosophy. I mean, it is radical. But it's the essence of every single spiritual path, and it's the essence of self-help and personal development and self-actualization. Actualized.org is jihad. It's a modern version of jihad, framed in a culture and in a way that is suited to the 21st century materialistic, rationalist, secular Western mind.
All right, good place for a break there. I was trying to put myself in the shoes of someone who's never heard anything like this.
I'm glad you did.
Imagine, hearing this for the first time. And I can imagine it sounding like blasphemy. That sounds blasphemy. That, I am Allah. That doesn't make sense. Something's wrong there. That doesn't make any sense. But I was also thinking at the same time that intuitively there might be something there that resonates with the side of you that there's all this work that is always out there somewhere. And then he's pointing towards this internal work, right? I think there's this awareness that we have no matter what branch we're involved with when we're living our lives, and whether you're a Christian or Jewish, atheist, scientist, whatever you come from, there's this what's my part in this? What am I doing? How do I focus and fix this thing that's going on within me? You have this sense of something's not right, or something just doesn't feel right. And I think that is what Leo in this video is trying to point towards. This internal thing going on, rather than the distractive nature of everything, the chaos that's kind of going on out there.
Smart people don't squabble.
Yeah.
That's one thing right away. Because there's a million ways of taking this wrong. One thing I wanted to note was, this is from years ago. He's still got his channel, but he posts way more infrequently. But the mastery of like, I'm going to look at the camera the entire time, uninterrupted. I know he prepared a lot in these days and probably still does. And so kudos to him for such a intelligent, look at this, look at that cranium. Smart. He's a smart guy. He's not, and I'm not going to sit there and squat. I'm going to do it a little bit because I'm not that smart. Yeah. Somebody smarter than me wouldn't do what I'm about to do, which is the obvious. There's so many ways of taking this. Somebody could go, "Are you kidding me? This is a grift." You know, jihad is actualized dialogue. He's trying to He's trying to associate that with this. But I noticed that, like, throughout my life, smart people don't bother to explain shit. They just quietly get wiser. Yeah. They don't do this thing where they try to cover all the bases in that. Because you can't. Yeah. You can't stop somebody from watching this and deciding for themselves what it means. Yeah. Or, you don't know. Nobody knows anything till they actually know. And upon knowing, there's usually silence because it's wisdom. It's like, what are you going to do with wisdom? I don't know if wisdom is around to even be perceived by people. The easiest way to disseminate wisdom is to be it. And let it radiate until everybody quietly either kills you because you're too wise or changes their ways. Yes, this is very intelligent. I hope that the viewer can listen to this and learn what he's saying. And don't assume that it could be anything from literally you are Allah. Not like there's the one version of it by going, getting wrapped up in the ways of the world, but failing to realize the inner work. But then there is I'm actually going to say it, the potential that it's like some kind of solipsistic thing. Yeah. Like Allah is, I liked when he said that thing about Allah is asleep and then Allah is awake. Sometimes Allah is asleep and he fights himself, and then sometimes Allah is awake. Take it whatever way evolves you, is what I would say. Take this whatever way evolves you. Yeah, that's my thing I'm going to say.
All right. Continue on to the second part.
That's what actualized.org is. Ta-da. That's also what Zen is. Zen is jihad. Neo-Advaita is jihad. Advaita Vedanta is jihad. Yoga is jihad. Self-help is jihad. Jed McKenna's work, if you're familiar with his writings, is a very potent form of jihad. What's interesting about Jed McKenna's work is that, unlike a lot of other spiritual work, which tends to be very indirect and sort of loosey-goosey and has a lot of fantasies about improving the self and about being spiritual and lovey and dovey and all this sort of stuff, his work is very direct. It cuts the shit. It's very much about the jihad part. He really emphasizes the jihad part. It's a self-annihilation. It's a waging of a war with yourself. And that's very direct, and it's very radical. It is very radical, which is why McKenna's work is polarizing. People either love it or they hate it. Because either you're at the point where you can do a direct jihad, or you're at the point where you can't. And 99% of people in the world can't. They're not ready to surrender their ego. They're not even ready to hear about it or to even read about that possibility. But then those who are, and that's a very direct path. If you can just go and straight up wage a full-on war with yourself and burn yourself alive in the spiritual fires. So if you resonate with Jed McKenna's work, well, then you understand jihad very well. The other spiritual traditions tend to emphasize the jihad component less, because what does the ego hate the most? The ego hates the most its own power being threatened. So most spiritual traditions, what they actually do is they try to trick the ego into doing spiritual work. They don't tell the ego that you're outright going to kill yourself. They don't tell you that, because if they tell you that, then no one's going to listen. No one wants that. No one's going to buy into your spirituality if you tell them that. So instead, what you do is you tell them the opposite. You tell them, oh, you're gonna grow yourself. Life's gonna become more beautiful and this and more loving, and you're gonna have more power and more this. And so you tell the ego all the stuff it wants to hear. Because as the ego then gets going into the practices, as it starts doing yoga and meditation and self-inquiry and all this, then it slowly starts to realize, like, holy shit, I'm actually gonna kill myself. But by that point, it's sort of already like, well, I've already been doing this for a couple of years. I'm already sort of bought into it. Fine, fuck it. I'll just carry it. But it still doesn't really understand. The ego will only understand what it really means to die after it's dead. And that's such a radical thing that if the ego knew about it beforehand, it would never go there. It can't go there. So many spiritual paths, what they do, because most people are not ready for a true jihad, what they do is they have to do a gradual ramp up. So most spiritual teachings are weak sauce. They're not strong sauce. It's weak sauce for the ego. It's a little bit of like, oh, just meditate to relax, to melt away your stress, or do this technique, this breathing technique. It'll help to calm your monkey mind. That's sort of like how it starts, right? It's the ego looking to improve itself, thinking that, oh, I can do spirituality but still stay fundamentally in power. I can still stay alive. I can improve my self-image. I can become this enlightened master or this spiritual guru type person. And that's a nice image to aspire to. But of course, what's not realized is that in the end, you will lose absolutely everything. You will surrender everything. There will be nothing of you left. All self-images will be broken and completely shattered. And your entire notion of reality will collapse and you will die. And then that will be your awakening, is your death. But that doesn't compute for the selfish mind. And even self-help, even stuff like what Tony Robbins teaches, and just, lots of self-help is just about giving you career advice, business advice, relationship advice, this sort of flimsy type of advice. That's all good, but ultimately, that is also jihad. It's just a very gradual form of jihad, such that most people who are even teaching self-help, kind of basic self-help, they don't even realize what they're really teaching. They think they're teaching self-improvement. And in a sense, they are. But ultimately, that self-improvement is leading you up Maslow's hierarchy, ultimately to self-transcendence. And that's, in our current culture and era, that's what all that most people can handle. They can't handle any more than that. Now, of course, if you can handle more than that, then go for the direct jihad approach. And Actualize.org is kind of somewhere in the middle. I don't try to beat you over the head with jihad too much, because I know that most people aren't gonna buy into it. The more you stress the jihad, the smaller your spiritual audience will grow. Will shrink. It'll shrink down smaller and smaller and smaller. And basically, you're going to have a very hardcore teaching for a very small number of people who are extremely serious about this work. That's sort of what happens with Jen McKenna. And then the less you emphasize jihad, the more people will be attracted to you, because their egos come flocking to spirituality because they want to have a spiritualized ego. Now, of course, the way that the devil works is that it turns everything backwards and inside out, 180 degrees. So when you hear jihad in the news or in mainstream culture, you hear it as the exact opposite as what I'm describing. You hear it as selfishness. You hear it as people engaging in violence and in warfare and in hatred and in condemnation of other groups and in judging others and waging jihad against them. That's what the devil does. See my video, What is the Devil? To explain the tricks of the devil. But the devil works through illusion and self-deception. And so what the devil does is he will take the truth, he will take the most potent forms of spirituality, and he will corrupt them inside out, which is exactly what happens with Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, and all the other isms that are out there. Because the greatest threat to the devil is the truth, so he has to take control over any mechanisms which might reveal the truth too directly. It's too direct. So why is there this corruption and this misunderstanding of what Islam is? It's because there's well, when a spiritual teaching is too direct, it gets corrupted. The more mainstream it gets, it becomes the enemy of its own success. There are supposed to be like 2 billion Muslims in the world right now, and it's a quickly growing religion. So anything that appeals to 2 billion people has to be very, very diluted and watered down, and actually it has to be very materialistic, which is why the lesser jihad is a materialistic form of the greater jihad. You see, materialism is about fighting in this physical world, whereas the greater jihad is fighting within yourself and attaining the spiritual world, the spiritual realms. The word Allah means God, of course, but it also means really absolute infinity. Not God as a man in the clouds with a beard, but Allah as this thing right here. What science calls reality, that's what Islam calls Allah. What the atheist calls the Big Bang or reality, this very present moment that's happening right now, objective physical reality, that's what the atheist refers to as Allah. But the atheist isn't conscious, the scientist isn't conscious of the full significance of what the word reality really means and what it really is. It's absolute infinity. That's what Allah is. In Islam, they have what's called the 99 names of Allah. These are titles that are given to Allah which describe the various properties and characteristics of Allah. And this can be quite illuminating. You can go to Wikipedia, type in 99 names of Allah, and you will get this list. I want to read you some of the names from this list because this describes exactly what Allah is. The King, the Peace, the Holy, the Controller, the Supreme, the Creator, the All-Knowing, the All-Seeing, the All-Aware, the Magnificent, the Sublime, the Vast, the Wise, the Witness, the Truth, the Reality, the One, the Perceiver, the Indivisible, the All-Powerful, the Beginningless, the Endless, the Hidden, the Good, the Light, the Beautiful, the Patient, the Guide, the Giver of Life, and the Taker of Life, and the Infinite. This is just a partial listing. You can find the full list on Wikipedia if you're curious. So all of these accurately describe the properties of Allah. These are the properties of reality when you have a direct consciousness of what reality is as a whole, and not just some fragment in the way that science, for example, studies it, or the way that atheists understand it. When you actually experience Allah, and it's possible to have a direct experience of Allah because that's exactly what you are Allah, you will understand that all of these perfectly describe Allah. Perfectly. When I was reading this list, it actually brought me to tears because when I was reading it online, because I'm reading it and it's my direct experience that is being described here. It's a perfect description, a perfect description. And the reason I'm telling you this is because people think that, but Islam is so corrupt. Yes, it's corrupt in many ways, but don't lose the core that's there. The core there contains some deep truth, which is why Islam is so entrenched, which is why people don't give up Islam. See, a lot of atheists and scientifically minded Western people, secular people, they look at Islamic people and Islamic countries and they say, well, why don't they just give all this up? It's just silly ideas and myths and stories, and it's all just nonsense, and it's filled with corruption, and it promotes violence and all of this. No, that's because you're not seeing through to the truth there. All you're seeing is just the pure corruption. And of course, when you're just seeing the pure corruption, then you're going to have the opinion that, oh, it's just nonsense, you should just throw it all away. Better to do with it, away with it. But the people who see the truth in it and who've had these direct experiences, they're never going to give it up. Never. Because they know the power of the truth that's there. Now, of course, what a lot of them don't know is that that truth is equally there in many other traditions through many other forms, including in Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, yoga, Zen. I mean, you name it, there's so many. Shamanism, psychedelics, just plain old-fashioned contemplation or meditation can get you there. There's so many ways to get there.
All right, we will stop this first part there. There was a lot in that first chunk about the ego. And I was thinking maybe for our audience, because when I was in Christianity, it was a long time before I heard about this thing called the ego. Maybe you could talk a little bit to our audience about the ego and what he's getting at with this idea about the ego.
Well, the whole video is actually, I want to reiterate that I got much respect for Leo in the way he does things, because he's a preparer. He's disciplined in ways that I am not.
Yeah.
And I respect his approach to this. A lot of care to explain this.
Yeah.
And so, but I'm going to respond to what you said in my way. You know, despite all the compliments I just gave, this is an interesting approach. You know, this was years ago. He may have changed from this point and even how he would approach it. Because he even said, you know, there's easy sauce versus hard sauce.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you've got to meet people where they're at. But the interesting thing about the greater jihad, from what I would assume, is explaining it in this way, is he's throwing so many concepts at you. And, you know, I like that he said. They promise all these wonderful things, but if you knew the work ahead of you, you wouldn't even take one step. That's one word I've heard in the spiritual path. Yeah. You after the greater jihad? You after the greatest things? Are you really, as a Christian, let's shift gears just for a moment, you really after being baptized with fire? You really ready to pick up your cross and follow Christ? Or name the religion, let's stick with, but we'll stay within Islam. If you're really after it, I love that he didn't really he got right down to it and said, you wouldn't accept it if your ego knew what the problem is. Your ego is the beliefs. Yeah. Interesting approach to it, because if you crack the shell of this thing open, the only thing that goes away is the beliefs. It's like, I was saying to you last night, we were at a thing and it came to me and I walked up to you in the midst of everybody and I said, imagine that. The only thing afraid of fear is that is afraid is fear. That's the only thing you lose. It's funny, actually, that the only thing that goes away that has the capacity for fear is like fear. It's like, oh, I don't want to lose fear. I don't want to lose sadness. I'll be some kind of a weirdo. Yeah. I was thinking about so to get to it, the ego is all these things. It's the ego is the thing you don't realize is hell for you, but you mistake as heaven. Like, I would never want to be casually walking down the street in like clothes that were bought at some cheap store with no status. No one knows who I am. I haven't done anything with my life. Yeah. Meanwhile, an egoless person walking down the street, a no person, not lofty. Yeah. How does anyone become egoless and a public speaker? It's like a mystery. Because the thing you want is to walk within the kingdom, is to bask in Allah's, which is everywhere, which he hinted at. The ego is the impediment of that, but the ego is all your ideas of it. The thing that you transcend in the end is this entire video. Yeah. Now that you got it, now that you're wondering, curious, drop the video and drop everything else too. Drop everything. Just let go. Don't even drop it. Dropping it's too much action. Just let go. And you're there. And it's not what the ego imagines is glorious. It is if you're suffering. It's dramatic. If you're struggling hanging on to your beliefs, to let go of them, you might cry, you might laugh, you might have an exuberant experience. But if you've already been on this path, like many people do, till they find the secret knowledge, it's a little bit more subtle, and then you're like, oh, geez.
You know what's interesting about this is that you have to take this path, because either one way or the other, if your ego is vibrant and fully alive, it's going to say, I want to have some. It's going to grab the things that it thinks are going to make it stronger, and then once it's hooked, then it's going to go through the whole course, the whole evolution of figuring out that, oh no, it's like a fish. It doesn't know. It sees the worm on the hook, and it has to take it. Which is interesting, right? Mm-hmm. Because eventually, given enough time, everything's going to have to go through that cycle of biting that hook. Mm-hmm. And, and then jigs up.
Yep.
But anyway, good first part. Hopefully you guys enjoy it. Let us know. I'm gonna weigh this in the comments and the likes and see what you
guys will be the deciders.
Yeah.
If you was a part 2 to this.
Yeah.
Just comment part 2.
Yeah, comment
If you
part
want to see a
2.
second one, if you're like, guys, this was crazy, we don't want this, then we'll go by that.
Yeah. All right, guys. Hopefully you liked it. If you did, don't forget to hit the like, subscribe, share this with a friend, and everyone until next time, stay spiritual.